Welcome to Grace Gabs. This is Shonda Schaefer, and I am so excited to be here today with two of my very special friends. We wanted to come to you on a fairly serious note, but we have been getting a lot of questions about violence during this period. And so I have invited a couple of my dear friends, Michelle and Mike, and you will recognize them. I'm going to let them give you their titles and what they do for our community, and then we're going to start having a very serious conversation about what domestic violence looks like during this COVID crisis. So, Michelle?
Hello, I'm Michelle Morgan. I'm Vice President and Director of the Family Justice Center at One Safe Place. And thank you so much for hosting this. Glad to be here.
Wonderful. Mike?
Well, I'm Mike Hamlin, and I have the honor and the blessing of being Grapevine's police chief.
And I will put a plug in, one of our best board members. Mike also serves on the GRACE Board of Directors. So thank you guys for being here. You know what? Why don't I start with Mike? Mike, can you tell me a little bit about what you and your officers have seen more so in this most recent area? I know you guys are very keen. You spend a lot of time on training your officers to look out for potentially dangerous situations when it comes to domestic violence and so on. But can you tell us some of the things that you've been seeing in our area?
Well, I'll tell you that the whole time with that the COVID virus surfaced, it is really, in my 36 years of being in law enforcement, I've not seen anything like it. It is one of in the truest sense, it has changed the way we do business in a number of ways, certainly on a temporary basis. But I even think there are some long range effects that we will change in the way we do business. Relative to police work, I've told people a number of times, our job never changed. We continue to put officers on the street. Our dispatch center continues to answer 911 calls. And it's the business looks different internally, but externally we've tried very hard that the end user, if you will, they don't see any difference. They still need to see officers in our police cars out there moving around the city and being available. So none of that has really changed, although internally it has changed. We've restructured ourselves and those sorts of things. When we get into looking at call load, very early on in the process, I felt like there were certain metrics, if you will, that would give us immediate response. We looked at them virtually every day at 9 o'clock, and I will tell you that domestic violence calls was one of those metrics that we paid very close attention to. And there's about, I think about 9 of them that we monitored. And initially, like probably a lot of law enforcement agencies across certainly the DFW area and maybe even the country, call load really seemed to fall off. I mean, I think as people were really getting their arms around what was going on and trying to understand it and how do they protect themselves and how do they interpret the volumes of information that was coming out, at least from a Grapevine's perspective, we saw a fairly significant decline in call load initially. And as time has marched forward, we have begun to see that call load increase, and now we see it at the 2019 levels again. When I take a look at the domestic violence calls, being a student of statistics for more than 30 years, it's not just about a number. And so I tend to look at things, I try to look at them a little more holistically. And so when I ventured off into looking at this for preparation for today, I narrowed it down to looking at about a 78-day period from March 1 to May 17. And then I compared that call load relative to domestic violence across 2018 and 2019. Now, if we just look at 2019 numbers and we compare it to that, there are what I would say significant increases in domestic violence call load and the various ways to look at it associated to that. When we look at it against 2018, not quite so much. We're 2020 is much more comparative to volume relative to 2018.
Wow, that's really interesting. I think probably, as you just said, that it's hard to really talk about this issue when it comes to numbers. I think the numbers tell part of the story, but I'd like to bring Michelle into the conversation. Being at the Family Justice Center, seeing the families that are reaching out for support in this area, what kind of things have you seen, be it numbers or personal stories that you've witnessed? What do you think this crisis has done in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the issue specific to domestic violence and you add external factors like stress, financial strain, all of that has a negative impact on survivors, and it creates additional circumstances that compromises their safety. And so it's interesting, as we've been talking to many of our police chiefs in Tarrant County, it is a little unique to each individual community of what they've seen. I mean, we saw in the city of Fort Worth an immediate spike in March, 21% increase when they compared March of 2019 to 2020 pandemic. We couldn't tell initially because spring break numbers sometimes are a little high, but finally after the month closed, we did see that. April, they leveled out. In some of our other communities, their numbers are down as well. Just like we're kind of seeing in Grapevine, they initially were down, but now they're kind of consistent. In terms of the social services perspective, we've also kind of seen a little bit of the same. Initially, right when March happened, numbers plummeted. I think for us and for many of our other social service partners. As you can imagine, as more people were staying at home, it's much harder to access those resources when the family unit is now on top of everyone. And control was at an all-time high. We are seeing gradually those numbers increase just a little bit more, but our numbers from a social service perspective and many of our partners has not had that significant 21% increase. And I think that's just because control, and it's harder to reach us when more of the family unit is at home, during this time.
Can you, either of you really, talk to me about kind of the severity of the calls? And that's what we're hearing from some of our other partners. That's what our case managers are reporting back, that whereas maybe there is less reports, the severity is significantly higher. Would you agree with that? Is that what your experience is, Mike?
I don't know that I could say here in Grapevine that we have seen an increase in the severity of the level of violence, from year over year that we've seen.
Michelle, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I would definitely say the calls that we have been receiving at this point, there has been an increase in severity. We are seeing more strangulation cases and more uses of weapons during this time, more so than what we have outside of the pandemic timeframe.
We mentioned a little bit about the report. Well, there's a couple of factors, and I'm just this is just my guess. One, I can tell you that being home certainly adds the stressors. However, being in groups, being in restaurants, bars, social settings especially where there's alcohol involved, it feels as though that's happening less right now, probably because we're all social distancing. I'm curious if maybe that has a piece of it as well. And I guess the other piece is the reporting. And this is something I'd love for our listeners to know too, that GRACE, along with almost all other social services I can imagine, have had to modify the way we do our casework. And one of the challenges, and frankly, one of the deficits that we found is that we're not face-to-face with people. Michelle and One Safe Place, I'll tell you, that's why we partnered with you, because it's a lot of times we'll have families come in and say, I need food for the day, or a woman coming in, I need food for my children today. And it's only after we kind of start talking with her and create that safe space do we find out that it's because husband is punishing her by keeping all the food away, or, whatever that story looks like. But it's usually much, much after we've created that very personal relationship. So trying to do this over the phone, I'm just terrified. I don't think that we are having that opportunity. And so I'm really looking forward to getting back face to face with some of these vulnerable folks. Is that what you've been seeing elsewhere, Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it creates challenges. I mean, and if we're dealing with someone who's still in the abusive relationship, it makes telehealth services almost impossible. It's not safe for them to jump on a Zoom call or jump on a cell phone call and speak with a therapist or an advocate. And so that has been rather challenging when they could say they're running to the grocery store, but they're actually, coming up to actually speak with an advocate or do counseling. We are seeing, obviously, as the governor is beginning to loosen some standards and open some things, we are projecting that more and more people will begin to walk in for services. Our doors at the Fort Worth location never closed. I will tell you, most people did not walk in the door at all. That dramatically decreased. Most people were calling ahead of time. So we are looking at our staffing model to continue to, as we think the numbers will continue to slowly and gradually increase, that people that want to feel comfortable, that need to come in for services, that we will still have staff there at the Fort Worth location to be able to do that. And then whenever, Shonda, whenever you open back up and you're ready for us to be there, then we'll talk about a schedule and we'll be right back at Grace as well doing the same thing.
That's really good to touch on too. We are in the building. We're trying to do as much case management over the phone for obvious social distancing reasons, but we are in the building. And if anybody came to the doors, we would absolutely sit down and talk with them. We've got our protocols in place, temperature taking and so on. But I would hate for anybody to second guess coming in, reaching out for help. So I would want to say that for sure. Mike, can you tell me a little bit about some of the things you do with your officers? And I asked the question because I kind of know the answer. You guys do what I have witnessed is over and above when it comes to training your officers to know what to look for. So what kind of ongoing things are you working with your frontline folks?
Well, I will tell you, and before I get into that, let me make one comment. All three of us are in the people-centric business. And it is, and I've shared that with our staff, is, the way we've been forced to do business here lately just doesn't feel right. The gloves don't fit. And we need to be able to interact with people. All of us are in that profession. And I would mirror Michelle's comments a minute ago. I think when we get closer to that posture, that we will see reporting, whether it be domestic violence of adults or violence of children, we will see those numbers increase. We have communicated with our staff. We share those metrics that I mentioned earlier, so that our personnel are aware that are things going up, are things going down. Property crimes, for instance, we saw some of the property crimes go down early on. There's some other call types that we saw tend upwards as we work through the crisis. We're constantly and regularly talking about paying attention to our people in the community. One of the things that I heard a story yesterday that really struck me, somebody here in our community, just scared to death to get out of the house. Just fear. And how do we as an organization communicate to those individuals? Yes, we need to be smart about what we do, but we need to have a life, and we need to be able to live our life. So we look for ways to aid the community, not just in police services, but in a number of different ways that can begin to put their lives back together.
Yeah, and you just mentioned something that struck a chord too. We haven't really talked much about mental health and mental illness. And I'm looking at Michelle. I know that plays a big part in this. Do you want to touch on that issue?
Yeah, just overall, for people outside of regular diagnosis that don't have mental health issues, during this time has struck some mental health issues. I've spoken earlier that some of us, like me, were not meant to be stay-at-home parents. Not my thing. I didn't sign up for that. Thank goodness mine are teenagers, right? I've only had to get into them a couple of times and you're 15, you're 20, you're supposed to do it. But a couple of my staff that have the younger toddlers and 5-year-olds that now all of a sudden their schoolwork has to be done on Zoom and they don't even know how to do a computer while now their job is calling a Zoom call at the same time. That's hard stuff, to do. And so when you add all those components, And most of my staff and all of your team are people oriented. And so now we're people oriented through high virtual platforms. It makes it really, really challenging and difficult. And then on top of that, for those that already had existing mental health issues, I mean, this is a huge anxiety. And so we've had to really talk a lot with our teams and from a national perspective of how can you address the mental health issues and the anxiety about having your staff return back to the work, making sure they feel protected, making sure clients are protected, and doing all of those things where before someone could just walk in and you see them, you know, regardless. So we have seen a lot of the walk-ins that we've had during this 11-week period have been severe mental health issues that have walked through our doors. In the city of Fort Worth, they opened up all public transportation. So anyone could get anywhere for free for a period of time. That has now changed in the past couple of weeks. But because of that and just our physical location, a lot of the churches, and there's a community church down the street from us, they all opened up food pantries 5 days a week. And so the foot traffic from JPS down from a couple of those food pantries off of Hemp Hill Street in Fort Worth was huge. And as a result, we also were seeing some of that walk-in traffic come into our facility as well. So the mental health component, the disconnection from people, from families, for some not having the technology and capabilities to even do it on a virtual platform is a real issue. And it's something to not be ignored across the board for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. It has just been a whole new world, hasn't it? You know, I want to take an opportunity to talk about what people can do. And so there's a couple of audiences that I suspect might be watching this. One is someone who is currently experiencing either violence or the threat of violence or the anxiety over the potential violence. So let's start with that. Michelle, I know you have a bunch of resources, and by the way, we'll include these in the comments section of the video, but talk to me about what someone can do if they're feeling threatened or fear of violence right now.
The first thing I would say is talk to an advocate. And so you can walk into our Fort Worth location Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. That's 1100 Hemp Hill. Or give us a call. Our number is 817-916-4323. You can talk to an advocate over the phone. If it's not safe for you to do either one of those things, you can go to our website at onesafeplace.org and through the contact us and page there and send us an email. That'll get an email. We'll route that to an advocate that can email you back, see if there is a good time, or if we just need to communicate via email, we can do that if that's the safest place. So I think that's the first step is talk to an advocate. They can do some education, you know, over the phone. We can do a danger assessment to see, are you at risk for any of the high risk factors for homicide or those sorts of things? And then really kind of walk through. Most of our partners are still doing services. Services look a little different, but they are still doing services. We're still putting plans in place for those individuals that need it. So I think for us, that's the first step.
You know, that's a good point. And I will tell you, as I said earlier, Grace is not the experts in this field, but we certainly have wraparound services. So I would add to that by saying, because I've had conversations with women who say things like, well, I can't leave. I don't have a place to go. I haven't been working. I have no money. I have no car. Those are the types of services that work so well with what One Safe Place is doing as far as Grace is concerned, because we can provide some of those wraparound services. And then I would further say, and Mike, you can certainly chime in, but we have had an amazing relationship with the officers that have actually at points brought women to our facility so that we can take them to that next step. I mean, this is, again, officers who are going over and above, but I think that's pretty standard protocol for y'all. So I can say without a hesitation that if you feel physically harmed in the moment, then you absolutely need to dial 911. Right. But Mike, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I would say, you know, that what's important here is that, you know, if somebody finds themselves in a situation, you know, reach out, you know, and reach out to somebody you trust that will listen to you and that will advocate on your behalf. You know, certainly you can call 911 and we're going to show up. You can, you know, if you're not comfortable dialing 911, you can contact our our non-emergency number, 817-410-8127, or you can contact our detective division directly at 817-410-3200, and we'll connect you with our victim advocate who is a detective who can also begin the process of the investigation and that sort of stuff, but can immediately turn towards advocating on behalf of that victim and moving towards services. And so, you know, the communication that I want the community to hear is that if you find yourself in this situation, whether it's the Grapevine Police Department or One Safe Place or Grace or a neighbor or a family member, you know, contact somebody and get the process started, because that's how we get healing started and you know, recovery, and that's what's important.
That's exactly right. And you know, I also want to clear up one other issue that I hear quite often, especially in our community, and that has to do with our undocumented population. We see that objection, I guess you could say, to reaching out probably most often. I would say that's the number one reason why women have refused additional services, is because either they or their abuser is undocumented. And Mike, we haven't talked about this specifically, but can you talk about, if at all, does that play into when you get involved?
Great question, Shonda. Thank you for answering it. The simple answer is simply this, that whether a person is a victim, a witness, immigration status has absolutely nothing to do with the reporting of a crime. And whether it be a domestic violence crime, it would be any crime. I encourage all of our citizens and those visiting our community in Grapevine to reach out to us, to give us the opportunity to help them work through whatever matters. And again, immigration status has absolutely nothing to do with people reporting crimes or whether they're safe to report crimes. They are absolutely safe to bring their issues to the Grapevine Police Department. So thank you for asking that.
I appreciate that. Michelle, did you have anything on that? I know that that's an issue your managers struggle with as well.
Absolutely has no bearing on services for us whatsoever. It does sometimes play a part maybe in civil and criminal justice systems down the road, but in terms of advocacy services, absolutely not. We don't care, and it's not going to hinder any services from there. And when you talk to one of our advocates, whether the criminal justice system has been involved or maybe Child Protective Services has been involved or not been involved, we don't talk to those agencies unless the client gives us consent to do so. And so we kind of talk about what the consent process looks like, and it's all client driven by what the survivor wants us to do, and we walk through those options together with that individual.
Absolutely. And I would say the same goes for Grace. All services are offered without concern about that. You know, and finally, to kind of wrap it all up, I want to encourage everyone to take a look specifically at the One Safe Place website. I know you have some resources available there. And then I'm going to offer maybe on your behalf, but I would venture to guess that either Michelle or Mike would be happy to talk to any groups, churches, organizations about these types of topics, because I think at the end of the day, awareness and advocacy from everyone is important. You don't have to be a police chief. You don't have to be an expert in family justice to understand that we all have a responsibility to keep our eyes open and to you know, see something, say something. And so I think to take an opportunity to review those websites and some of the other materials that are out there would be good for anybody, for sure. And then as I wrap it up, I want to give you a chance to any parting comments. And then I also want to tell all of our listeners to stay tuned. In the next couple of days, we're going to have the same rather difficult conversation, but necessary one with regards to child abuse. We're going to be talking with Julie Evans over at Alliance for Children. So stay tuned and look out for that. But Michelle, did you have any parting comments?
I just really appreciate partnering with you at Grace and Chief at Grapevine Police Department. I know both of you probably know this, but Grapevine is my hometown. My dad just sold the house I was raised in and had it for 40 years at the end of last year. It was kind of bittersweet. And so I am just so happy that to come full circle in my career and be able to partner with such a great organization in the city of Grapevine that will always be near and dear to my heart. So thank you for both of you for allowing us to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Mike?
I would reiterate that. I would say thank you to both of your organizations, because you help us, do what we need to do and be in the best interest of all the victims. I'd also just like to say, during this time, thank you to the Grapevine community. Tremendous support from day one, and it continues today. They've helped us in so many ways, and we wouldn't be as successful as we are without them. So thank you, Shonda, for the opportunity.
You bet. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedules. And for all of our listeners, keep checking our sites for more information. And by all means, take care of yourself and each other. And I will see you again on the next edition of Grace Gabs. Thank you.